Under the cold rain in Portland, a starving 12-year-old girl stepped into a luxury restaurant just to ask for a bite of food. No one helped. Everyone pushed her away. When she desperately grabbed an unfinished plate, the entire restaurant rose up, yelling at her. A wealthy man rushed over, shouting for security and demanding she be handed to the police. But right when everything was about to collapse, a billionaire stood up, stopped the chaos, and said, "Leave the girl alone. I'll take care of her." And from that moment on, Emma's life changed in a way no one expected. But nobody knew she once had a very different life. Before we dive into her past, tell me where you're listening from. And don't forget to subscribe so I can send you more kind-hearted stories tomorrow. The story begins many years ago. Rain hammered against the rusted tin roof of the abandoned newsstand where Emma had spent another sleepless night. Each drop felt like a tiny hammer against her skull, a relentless rhythm that matched the gnawing emptiness in her belly. Her stomach twisted like barbed wire, the hunger gnawing deeper than any cold could reach. She pulled her knees to her chest, trying to preserve what little warmth remained in her thin, battered body. 6 months ago, she'd had everything. A warm home with yellow curtains in the kitchen window, her mother's laughter echoing through their small house as she baked chocolate chip cookies on Sunday afternoons, her father's strong hands ruffling her hair before he left for work at the lumber mill each morning. They weren't wealthy, but they had love. They had each other. That was enough. But cancer had stolen her mother in March, eating away at her until she was nothing but hollow cheeks and whispered apologies. Emma had held her hand as she took her last breath, promising to be strong. 2 weeks later, her father, a man who'd never missed a day of work in 20 years, collapsed at the mill. Massive heart attack, the doctor said, but Emma knew better. He died of a broken heart. Her uncle Robert and his wife Patricia had arrived at the funeral with practiced sympathy, their faces arranged in appropriate expressions of grief. They'd worn black. They'd hugged Emma, they'd whispered comforting words, and they'd moved into her parents' modest house within 3 days, promising to care for her, to give her the home she needed. But once the will was read and the property deed transferred into Robert's name, their masks had slipped like wet paint. The comfort turned to criticism, the kindness became cruelty. Patricia complained about Emma eating too much, about her taking up space, about the burden of another mouth to feed. Robert barely looked at her anymore, too busy selling off her father's tools, her mother's jewelry, anything of value. 3 weeks after the funeral, on a cold April evening, they'd thrown her out. "You're old enough to take care of yourself," Patricia had said, tossing Emma's small backpack onto the porch. "We've done our duty. We took you in, but we can't afford to keep you forever." Emma had begged. She'd promised to be good, to be quiet, to need nothing. But the door had slammed in her face, and she'd heard the lock click with a finality that still echoed in her nightmares. Since then, the streets of Portland had become her prison. She'd learned which dumpsters behind which restaurants yielded the best scraps. The Thai place on Morrison Street sometimes threw out entire containers of pad Thai. The sandwich shop on 3rd Avenue tossed day-old bread that was still mostly good. She'd learned which doorways offered shelter from the rain, which parks had unlocked bathrooms in the morning, which soup kitchens served meals on which days. She'd learned that rejection came in many forms. Some people looked through her as if she were glass. Others crossed the street to avoid her. A few had actually spat at her feet, calling her trash and waste of space. One woman had screamed at her for sitting too close to her boutique, saying Emma was bad for business. The other street kids had been her only company. There was Miguel, a 15-year-old who'd run away from a foster home where the father hit him. There was Sarah, 13, whose mother was in jail and whose father had disappeared years ago. They'd shared food when they found it, warned each other about dangerous areas, huddled together on the coldest nights. But lately, even they had disappeared. Miguel had mentioned something about heading south to California. Sarah had stopped showing up at their usual meeting spot behind the library. Emma was alone now, truly alone in a city of 500,000 people. This morning was different, though, and not in a good way. The usual spots behind the grocery stores yielded nothing. Just empty cardboard boxes soaked with spoiled milk, broken glass that cut her fingers when she searched too eagerly, and the stench of rotting vegetables that made her gag even though she was starving. Even the dumpster behind Wong's Chinese restaurant, usually reliable for at least some fried rice, had been emptied completely. A new lock gleamed on the enclosure, keeping her out. She dragged her weak legs toward the downtown district, each step an effort. Her shoes, donated sneakers from a church giveaway 3 months ago, had holes in both soles. She could feel every pebble, every crack in the sidewalk. Her jeans, too big and held up with a piece of rope, were filthy and torn at both knees. The t-shirt she wore had once been pink, but was now a grayish-brown, stained with who knows what. "Maybe today someone will help," she whispered to herself, clutching her chest where her mother's silver locket used to hang. That locket, with tiny photos of both her parents inside, had been the last piece of them she'd had. Patricia had ripped it from her neck the day before they'd kicked her out, claiming it as family property that was too valuable for a child. The September sun climbed higher, painting Portland's busy streets with golden light that seemed to mock her darkness. People in pressed suits and designer dresses rushed past, clutching their lattes and briefcases. Cars honked impatiently, bicycles whizzed by. Life thrived everywhere, in the laughter of college students heading to class, in the chatter of business people making deals, in the simple act of a mother holding her daughter's hand as they window shopped. But not in Emma's world. In her world, there was only hunger, exhaustion, and the desperate hope that maybe, just maybe, today would be different. She walked past food carts that lined the downtown blocks, each one a torture chamber of scents. Grilled cheese sandwiches oozing with melted cheddar, bacon sizzling on a flat-top grill, fresh coffee. God, she missed coffee. Her mouth watered so intensely it hurt, but no one gave her a glance. To them, she was invisible, just another piece of urban debris to step around, another problem to ignore. A businessman in a three-piece suit actually bumped into her, then looked at her with such disgust that she wanted to disappear into the pavement. "Watch where you're going," he snapped, as if she were the one at fault. "I'm sorry," she whispered, but he was already gone, his phone pressed to his ear, complaining loudly about some meeting. Finally, after walking until her feet screamed with pain, her eyes caught sight of a gleaming glass building ahead. The Sterling Room, Portland's most exclusive restaurant. She'd heard people talk about it in passing, a place where a single meal cost more than she'd seen in her entire life. Rich business people gathered there for power lunches, spending hundreds of dollars without even blinking. Through the enormous windows, she could see the glittering interior, crystal chandeliers that probably cost more than her parents' entire house. White tablecloths so pristine they seemed to glow. Well-dressed people laughing, talking, living lives so far removed from her reality they might as well have been on another planet. Emma knew homeless kids weren't welcome in such places. A security guard stood near the door, his arms crossed, his eyes scanning for exactly the kind of problem she represented. But hunger screamed louder than fear, louder than shame, louder than the last shreds of her dignity. She waited until the guard was distracted by a delivery truck, then slipped through the heavy glass doors. The blast of air conditioning hit her first, cold and clean, carrying the sense of a world she'd almost forgotten existed. The smell of perfectly seasoned roasted chicken, garlic butter, fresh bread, herbs she couldn't even name. It nearly knocked her down. The interior was even more intimidating up close. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light across everything, making the silverware sparkle and the wine glasses glow like jewels. White tablecloths draped over every surface, so clean and perfect that Emma felt dirty just looking at them. Well-dressed diners sat in comfortable chairs, their plates piled high with food that seemed almost obscene in its abundance. A waiter in a crisp white shirt and black vest walked past carrying a tray loaded with steaming dishes. He didn't even see her. Emma's heart hammered against her ribs. Every instinct told her to run, to leave before someone threw her out, but her stomach twisted with such desperate hunger that she couldn't move. When had she last eaten? Really eaten? 2 days ago, she'd found half a sandwich in a trash can. 3 days before that, the soup kitchen had given her a bowl of watery vegetable broth and a piece of bread. She approached the first table hesitantly. An older man in an expensive suit sat alone, reading a newspaper while he ate what looked like a steak. A whole steak, with potatoes and vegetables and a dinner roll on the side. "Excuse me, sir," Emma said, her voice barely audible. "Could you please spare just a little food? I haven't eaten in 2 days." The man didn't even lower his newspaper. He waved his hand dismissively, exactly like someone shooing away a fly, an annoying insect to be swatted. Emma felt something crack inside her chest, but she forced herself to move to the next table. A woman in a pearl necklace sat with another woman, both of them dressed like they were going to a fancy event. Their plates held delicate fish and colorful salads. "Ma'am, please," Emma said, her voice stronger now, desperation pushing past fear. "I'm so hungry. Just a little bit. Anything you could spare." The woman's face hardened into an expression of pure disgust. Her lip actually curled. "Get out of here! This isn't a soup kitchen. Someone call management." Emma's eyes burned with tears, but she swallowed them down. She moved to the next table, and the next, and the next. One by one, she moved through the restaurant like a ghost, invisible and unwanted. Some people turned away, refusing to even acknowledge her existence. Others muttered insults under their breath. Disgusting. Beggar. Probably on drugs. A few actually pulled their plates closer to themselves, as if her poverty were contagious, as if hunger could leap from her body to theirs. A younger man in trendy clothes and expensive sneakers looked at her with something almost like pity, but when his girlfriend shot him a warning glance, he shook his head. "Sorry, can't help you." At least he'd said sorry. That was something. By the time Emma reached the center of the restaurant, tears were streaming down her cheeks. She tried to wipe them away with her dirty sleeve, but they kept coming. Not just tears of hunger, but tears of humiliation, of hopelessness, of the crushing weight of being seen as less than human. Then she saw it. Near the corner window, bathed in afternoon sunlight, sat an abandoned plate. The person had clearly stepped away, maybe to take a phone call, maybe to use the restroom, but they'd left behind a feast. Grilled chicken breast, golden and perfectly seasoned, its skin crispy and glistening with herbs. Roasted potatoes that looked like they'd been kissed by butter and rosemary. Green beans so fresh and vibrant, they almost didn't look real. A dinner roll still warm with butter melting into it. Emma's vision tunneled. Her hands began to shake. Her mouth watered so intensely that she had to swallow repeatedly. This wasn't food from a dumpster. This wasn't moldy or spoiled or questionable. This was real, actual, perfect food. No one will help me, she thought, her mind beginning to fracture under the weight of hunger and desperation. Maybe I have to help myself, just this once, just to survive. Before her conscious mind could stop her hands, before fear or shame or morality could intervene, she lunged forward and grabbed the plate. Her fingers, dirty, shaking, desperate, closed around a fork. She shoved it into the chicken and brought a piece to her mouth. The taste exploded across her tongue. Warm, seasoned, real. It was so good it hurt, so perfect that she almost sobbed. She'd forgotten what real food tasted like. For 6 months, she'd eaten trash, scraps, things that barely qualified as food. But this was what normal people ate. This was what having a home meant. She stuffed another bite in, no longer caring about manners or appearances. Then another. Her hands shook violently. Tears mixed with the food in her mouth. She was dimly aware that she was probably making animal sounds, but she couldn't stop. Suddenly, the entire restaurant went deathly silent, the kind of silence that precedes disaster. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" The voice boomed across the restaurant like thunder. Emma's head snapped up, the fork still halfway to her mouth, a piece of chicken dangling from it. The man whose meal she'd taken, tall, red-faced, wearing a designer suit, stormed toward her. His face had turned purple with rage. Behind him, other diners twisted in their seats to watch the spectacle. Waiters froze mid-step, their eyes wide. "You little thief!" The man's voice cracked with fury. "Someone call the police! This homeless brat is stealing my food!" Emma wanted to run. Every cell in her body screamed at her to drop the plate and bolt for the door, but her legs had turned to stone. Her entire body trembled as the man's shadow fell over her like a dark cloud. She could see the disgust in his eyes, could feel the judgment radiating from every person in the restaurant. Several diners shook their heads in disapproval. A woman clutched her purse closer, as if Emma might snatch it next. A waiter pulled out his phone, presumably to call security or the police. This was it. This was the moment she'd end up arrested, thrown in juvenile detention, lost in a system that would break her completely. But then, cutting through the chaos like a blade through silk, another voice spoke. Calm, deep, commanding. "Leave her alone. I'll pay for it." The restaurant collectively held its breath. Everyone turned. At a corner table, partially hidden in shadow, sat a man who seemed to exist in a different dimension than everyone else. He wore an impeccable navy suit that fit him like it had been sewn directly onto his body. His silver watch caught the light, Not flashy, but unmistakably expensive. His face was handsome in a weathered way, probably in his late 40s, with gray at his temples and eyes that carried both wisdom and authority. He rose slowly, deliberately, and the simple act of him standing commanded more attention than the angry man's shouting had. This was James Harrison, the billionaire real estate developer whose face appeared regularly in Portland's business journals, whose projects had reshaped the city's skyline, whose reputation for both shrewd business and unexpected generosity made him a local legend. "Bring her to my table," James said. It wasn't a request. It was a statement of fact. The angry diner stepped back immediately, his rage deflating like a punctured balloon in the face of James's authority. The waiters exchanged uncertain glances, then gently guided Emma across the restaurant toward James's table. Her hand still shook. Her heart hammered so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. The fork clattered onto the plate she still clutched. Is this the moment everything ends, she wondered, or the moment everything begins? James studied her with an intensity that made her feel both exposed and, strangely, seen. Really seen. Maybe for the first time in 6 months. His eyes took in everything. Her torn dress, her filthy hair, her pale face, her hollow cheeks. But his expression wasn't disgust. It was something else. Something that looked almost like recognition. "Child," he said softly, his voice carrying despite its gentle tone. "Why are you stealing when you could ask?" Emma's lips trembled. The tears she'd been holding back broke free, streaming down her cheeks in hot tracks. "I did ask, sir. I begged everyone here, every single person. They all told me to leave. They said I didn't belong. They said this wasn't a soup kitchen." Her voice cracked. "Sir, I haven't eaten real food in 2 days. Before that, I found half a sandwich in a trash can. Before that, watery soup at a shelter. I had no choice. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." The restaurant was absolutely silent now. Some customers looked away, shame coloring their faces. Others whispered behind their hands, probably trying to justify their earlier rejection. A few actually looked moved, their eyes glistening. James leaned back in his chair, his face unreadable. He seemed to be weighing something, measuring her, testing the truth of her words against some internal scale only he could see. Then he did something that made the entire room gasp. He pushed his own untouched plate toward her, and what a plate it was. Prime rib, cooked to perfection, its juices pooling around roasted vegetables that looked like they'd been arranged by an artist. A twice-baked potato with sour cream and chives. Fresh bread still steaming, with butter melting into it like liquid gold. "Eat, child," James said, his voice carrying a warmth that Emma hadn't heard directed at her in half a year. "Eat as much as you want, and from this day forward, you will never have to beg for food again. That's a promise." The crowd erupted. Whispers became conversations. Gasps became murmurs of disbelief. The same people who'd rejected her now watched with wide eyes, some shaking their heads as if they couldn't believe what they were witnessing. Others began recording on their phones, no doubt already composing social media posts about what they'd seen. A few people actually started clapping, slow at first, then building. But Emma barely heard any of it. She only stared at the plate in front of her, at this man who just promised her something that seemed impossible, a future without hunger. "Go on," James encouraged gently. "It's yours." With trembling hands, Emma picked up the fork. She cut a small piece of the prime rib, brought it to her mouth, and tasted what mercy felt like. And deep in her heart, beneath the hunger and the fear and the overwhelming relief, she knew with absolute certainty this was only the beginning. The first page of a story that would shake her world, challenge her spirit, and ultimately prove that sometimes the most broken people become the strongest. The black Mercedes S-Class rolled through Portland's affluent West Hills neighborhood like a shark through calm waters, silent, powerful, commanding respect. Emma pressed her face against the cool glass of the window, her breath fogging it up as she stared in wonder at a world she'd only glimpsed from a distance. Enormous houses sat back from the street, their manicured lawns stretching like green carpets. Trees lined the roads. Not the scraggly, neglected trees of her old neighborhood, but tall, healthy maples and oaks that seemed to reach for the sky with confidence. Each property had gates, walls, security systems visible at every turn. This was where the rich people lived, the people who didn't have to think about where their next meal came from, who didn't wake up cold and wet and afraid. It was the first time Emma had ever been inside a car, let alone one that smelled of leather and wealth, where the seats were heated and the ride so smooth she could barely feel the road beneath them. The driver, a middle-aged man in a neat gray suit, had helped her into the back seat with a kindness that surprised her, even offering her a bottle of water that she'd gulped down so fast it made her hiccup. James sat beside her, silent and thoughtful. His presence filled the vehicle with a gravity Emma had never felt before. Not oppressive, but solid, like he was the kind of person who kept his promises simply because he said he would. To Emma, he wasn't just a billionaire. He was a miracle. The first person in 6 months who'd seen her as human rather than garbage. "Don't be afraid," James finally said, his deep voice steady and calm. "From today, your life will change. But you must understand something important." He turned to look at her directly. "Money and comfort don't erase pain. You'll still face people who'll hate you for no reason except that you're different, that you've risen above where they think you belong. Are you ready for that?" Emma turned from the window to meet his eyes. Despite everything, despite the hunger, the fear, the 6 months of hell, there was still fire in her gaze. "Sir, I've been hated since my uncle threw me out. I've slept on concrete in the rain. I've eaten from garbage bins. I've begged strangers who spat at me and called me trash." Her voice grew stronger. "Nothing they do can hurt me more than what I've already survived." James studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. A faint smile touched his lips. This girl has fire, he thought. She's been broken, beaten down, but she hasn't shattered. There's steel underneath all that pain. The Mercedes turned into a long driveway that seemed to go on forever, lined with perfectly spaced maples whose leaves were just beginning to turn gold with autumn. Flower beds burst with late-season blooms, chrysanthemums and asters in brilliant purples and oranges. The driveway curved, and then the mansion came into view. Emma's breath caught in her throat. It stood 3 stories tall, built of white stone that seemed to glow in the afternoon sun. Floor-to-ceiling windows reflected the sky and trees. A fountain dominated the circular drive, water dancing and sparkling, creating rainbows in the mist. The architecture was both modern and classical, with clean lines softened by elegant details, balconies, decorative railings, columns that suggested strength without arrogance. This is where you live?" Emma whispered, her voice barely audible. James smiled faintly. "It's a house, but today, if you choose, it becomes your home." As the car rolled to a stop, staff members appeared as if summoned by magic. Drivers in gray uniforms, gardeners with tools, housekeepers in crisp black and white. All of them rushed forward, bowing respectfully to James as he stepped out of the car. But when their eyes fell on Emma, dirty, dressed in rags, clearly not belonging, whispers began immediately. Low, but not so low that Emma couldn't hear them. "Who is that girl? Look at her clothes. She looks like she came from the streets. Why is Mr. Harrison holding her hand? Is this some kind of charity publicity stunt?" James either didn't hear the whispers or chose to ignore them. He placed his hand gently on Emma's back, guiding her toward the massive front door. "Hold your head up, child. You have as much right to be here as anyone." Emma tried. God, she tried. But the weight of all those eyes, judging, questioning, condemning, pressed down on her shoulders like physical force. The front door opened automatically, and they stepped inside. If the exterior had been impressive, the interior was overwhelming. The foyer soared 2 stories high, with a chandelier, crystal, enormous, probably worth more than her entire old house, hanging from the ceiling like a frozen waterfall of light. The floor was marble, polished to such a shine that Emma could see her reflection, and immediately wished she couldn't. She looked even worse against all this beauty. Curved staircases swept up on either side, their railings carved wood and wrought iron. Original paintings hung on the walls, real art, not prints. Fresh flowers in huge vases perfumed the air. Everything was clean, perfect, like something from a magazine or a dream. To Emma, it was almost painful to look at. So much beauty, so much wealth, and she was dirt tracking across marble floors. But not all beauty welcomed strangers. At the top of one of the curved staircases, a tall woman appeared. She moved with the precision of someone who'd spent years perfecting her presentation. Back straight, chin up, every movement deliberate. Her name was Victoria, and she'd been the head housekeeper of the Harrison Mansion for 7 years, running it with the iron discipline of a general commanding an army. Victoria descended the stairs slowly, her heels clicking against marble with sharp, rhythmic precision. She wore a fitted black dress that probably cost more than Emma's parents had made in a month. Her dark hair pulled back in a severe bun, her makeup flawless. She stopped at the bottom of the stairs and bowed to James, a gesture of respect, but Emma noticed it was shallow, perfunctory. Then Victoria's eyes slid to Emma, and something cold flickered in them. Disgust, barely masked. Her lip curled almost imperceptibly. "Sir," Victoria said, her voice cultured and smooth. "Who is this guest?" The way she said guest made it clear she meant something else entirely. James's tone sharpened immediately. "She is not a guest. From today, she lives here under my protection. Her name is Emma. You will treat her with respect, the same respect you show me. Is that understood?" Victoria's smile tightened, but she bowed again. "Of course, sir. Welcome, Emma." The words were correct, but they carried no warmth. Inside, Victoria was seething. A dirty street child in this house, tracking filth across my floors, sitting at Mr. Harrison's table? This is outrageous. James called out, and a young man appeared from a side hallway. Marcus was James's personal assistant, 28 years old, ambitious and sharp. He'd worked beside James for 5 years, handling schedules, managing properties, sitting in on meetings. He'd truly believed, that he was the closest person to James, that he was being groomed for something greater. "Marcus," James said, "I want you to arrange everything for Emma. She needs to be cleaned up, given proper clothes, and shown to the blue guest room on the second floor. From now on, she'll eat what I eat, learn what she needs to learn, and grow up here as if she were my own daughter." Marcus bowed, his face a professional mask. "Of course, sir. I'll handle everything personally." But inside, Marcus's mind screamed in protest. 5 years. 5 years I've worked beside him, learning his business, earning his trust. And now this beggar gets his attention? Gets to live here? She'll eat at his table while I still eat in the staff quarters? No, this isn't right. She doesn't deserve this. Hours later, after being scrubbed clean by maids who'd barely hidden their disdain, after having her matted hair washed and combed until it shone, after being dressed in a simple but clean cotton dress, Emma stood before a full-length mirror in what James had called the blue guest room. The room alone was bigger than her old living room and kitchen combined. A 4-poster bed dominated the space, draped in soft blue fabric. Windows looked out over the gardens. A desk sat in one corner, a bookshelf in another. The bathroom, her own private bathroom, had a tub, a shower, thick towels, and soaps that smelled like lavender, but it was the mirror that held her attention. For the first time in 6 months, Emma saw herself not as a beggar, not as trash, but as a girl. Just a girl. 12 years old, with brown hair that was actually clean and soft now, with eyes that were too old for her face but still alive, still fighting. Tears filled those eyes and spilled down her cheeks. "Mom," she whispered to the mirror, to the ghost of the woman who'd loved her. "Dad, if you could see me now. I found someone kind. I found someone who sees me." Her voice broke. "I'm gonna be okay. I promise. I'm gonna survive this." Dinner was served in the great hall, a room that could have hosted 30 people, but tonight held only James at the head of a long mahogany table that gleamed like glass. Crystal glasses caught the light from yet another chandelier. China plates edged in gold sat atop chargers. Silver utensils flanked each place setting. Emma sat timidly to James's right, feeling like an imposter in a play she didn't understand. The household staff stood around the perimeter of the room. Victoria, Marcus, several maids, the butler, all watching her. A waiter brought out the first course, creamy soup in delicate bowls. Emma picked up her spoon carefully, trying to remember the manners her mother had taught her years ago. Don't slurp. Don't spill. Be grateful. As she lifted the spoon toward her mouth, Victoria leaned close to a younger maid beside her. Her voice was pitched to carry, not shouting, but loud enough. "This house has always been reserved for people of class and breeding," Victoria said, her eyes fixed on Emma. "Not street rats who don't know a salad fork from a dessert spoon." The words hit like a slap. Emma's hand froze midair, the spoon trembling. She felt herself shrinking, becoming small again, as if the streets had followed her through the mansion's golden doors. The maid giggled quietly, covering her mouth. James noticed immediately. He set down his own spoon with deliberate precision, the small sound somehow carrying more weight than Victoria's words. His eyes swept the room like a blade, and everyone fell silent. "Let me be absolutely clear," James said, his voice quiet but echoing through the hall with unmistakable authority. "This girl is now part of my family. She will be treated with dignity and respect. If I hear one more insult, one more whisper, one more snicker, that person will be removed from this house immediately and permanently. I don't care how long you've worked here. I don't care what your position is. Are we understood?" The hall was deathly silent. Victoria's face went pale. Marcus's jaw clenched. The maids bowed their heads. "Yes, sir," came the murmured response. But James wasn't finished. He turned to Emma, his voice softening. "Child, hold your head up. You don't owe these people any apologies. You eat. You belong here because I say you belong here, and this is my house." Emma lifted her chin, blinking back tears. She brought the spoon to her mouth and took a sip of the soup. It was delicious, creamy, perfectly seasoned, but she barely tasted it through the emotion clogging her throat. Silence doesn't erase hate, though. It only forces it underground, where it festers and grows and waits for the right moment to strike. Later that night, Emma sat on the edge of her new bed, her bed, with its soft mattress and clean sheets and pillows that didn't smell like the street. She stared at the room that was supposedly hers now, trying to process everything that had happened in less than 12 hours. From stealing food in desperation to this, from the streets to a mansion, from invisible to whatever she was now. She should have felt safe. She should have felt grateful. And she did. God, she was so grateful. But something disturbed her, something she couldn't quite name. The cold eyes of Victoria, the tight smile of Marcus, the whispers that had followed her like shadows through the halls. She pulled James's jacket, which he'd draped over her shoulders during the car ride, closer around herself. It smelled like expensive cologne and safety. "They can hate me," she whispered into the darkness of her new room. "They can mock me and whisper and try to make me feel small. But I will never go back to those streets. Never. I'll fight. I'll be strong. I'll prove I deserve to be here." Out in the hallway, just beyond her door, Marcus leaned against the wall. He'd pulled out his phone, scrolling through James's business contacts, thinking about the empire he'd spent 5 years helping to build, an empire he'd believed would eventually be partly his. He typed a quick text to Victoria. "We need to talk. She won't last. We'll make sure of it." Victoria's response came seconds later. "My office. 10 minutes. And so the mansion glittered that night with lights and luxury and the illusion of safety. But behind its golden walls, envy and betrayal were already weaving their nets, dark, patient, and deadly. Emma, exhausted beyond measure, finally fell asleep clutching James's jacket. She dreamed of her parents, of her mother's chocolate chip cookies and her father's laughter. She didn't dream of the storm gathering just beyond her door, but it was coming. It was already here. Morning sunlight flooded through the tall windows of James Harrison's mansion, casting golden rectangles across the marble floors that had been polished to a mirror shine overnight. Birds sang in the gardens, not pigeons and crows, but songbirds that Emma had only heard in movies. The morning air smelled clean, fresh, like possibility, but inside the mansion's walls, poison was spreading. Emma woke slowly, confused for a moment about where she was. The soft mattress, the clean sheets, the room bathed in gentle light. It all felt like a dream she might wake from at any moment, finding herself back in that abandoned newsstand with rain dripping on her face. She sat up, touching the nightstand to make sure it was real. Solid wood. Real. After washing her face in her private bathroom, still marveling at hot water that came from a tap, at thick towels, at soap that smelled like vanilla, she made her way downstairs. James had already left for an early meeting at his development company, but he told her the night before to eat breakfast in the dining hall. The dining hall felt cavernous with just her in it. The long table had been set with a single place setting, delicate china, heavy silverware, a cloth napkin folded into some complicated shape. Staff moved around the edges of the room like shadows, bringing out food. Scrambled eggs, fluffy and yellow, toast with real butter and jam, fresh fruit, strawberries, blueberries, melons sliced into perfect cubes, orange juice in a crystal glass, coffee, which Emma had never learned to like, but poured herself anyway because it felt grown up. She sat alone at the massive table, eating slowly, trying to savor each bite but also trying to be invisible. The staff watched her. She could feel their eyes, could hear their whispered conversations that always seemed to stop when she looked up. Victoria entered the dining hall with her usual sharp precision. Today she wore a charcoal gray dress, her hair pulled back so tightly it looked painful. Her heels clicked against the marble floor with aggressive rhythm. She stopped beside the table, looking down at Emma with barely concealed contempt. No smile now, no pretense. "So, this is what we've come to," Victoria said, her voice cold and sharp. "A street child sitting at the master's dining table, eating food that costs more than she could have imagined a week ago." Emma kept her eyes lowered, her hands trembling slightly as she held her fork. "Mr. Harrison told me to eat here, ma'am." Victoria's laugh was brittle, cruel. "And do you think his charity will last forever? Do you think this is real?" She leaned closer, lowering her voice to a harsh whisper. "He pities you today, child, but tomorrow when the novelty fades, when you're no longer a cute little project, he'll throw you back where you came from. You're nothing but a beggar playing dress-up. Don't ever forget that." The maids nearby giggled quietly, exchanging knowing glances. One of them, a young woman named Sarah, whispered loudly enough for Emma to hear. "She probably doesn't even know how to use half those forks." Emma's throat tightened, but she forced herself to take another bite of eggs. She remembered James's words from the night before. "You are not useless. You are a warrior." She held onto them like armor, like a shield against the arrows of cruelty flying at her from all directions. But the armor was thin and the arrows were sharp. Victoria's cruel words reached Marcus, who entered the dining hall with his usual confident stride. He wore an expensive suit, not as expensive as James's, but close, and carried himself like someone who mattered. His dark hair was styled perfectly, his face handsome in a calculated way. He clapped his hands slowly, mockingly, as he approached the table. "Victoria, you're absolutely right. This girl is enjoying luxuries she hasn't earned, hasn't deserved. She walked off the street and straight into paradise." He sat down at the table, not close to Emma, but not far enough away to be polite. He lowered his voice, though still loud enough for Emma to hear every word. "But perhaps we should help her understand her true place in this world. Mr. Harrison trusts me completely. I'm his right hand, his confidant. If we show him proof that she's still a thief at heart, that street rats never really change their nature, he'll turn against her. Then the streets will welcome her back." Emma's chest tightened with fear. Her fork clattered against her plate. She wanted to defend herself, to shout that she wasn't a thief, that she'd only stolen food because she was starving. But the words stuck in her throat. Who would believe her? The street kid against the head housekeeper and the personal assistant. Marcus smiled at her silence. "What's wrong, Emma? Cat got your tongue, or are you just realizing that fairy tales don't last forever?" Emma finally found her voice, small but steady. "I'm not a thief, sir. I was hungry. There's a difference." Marcus's smile widened, but it never reached his eyes. "Tell yourself whatever you need to, but Mr. Harrison's a businessman. Eventually he'll do the math on what you cost versus what you contribute, and the numbers won't work in your favor." He stood, adjusted his tie, and walked out of the dining hall, with Victoria following close behind. Emma sat alone at the enormous table, surrounded by luxury she'd never asked for, drowning in a sea of silent judgment from the staff, still lingering in the corners of the room. She managed to finish her breakfast, though the food now tasted like cardboard. As she stood to leave, she heard one of the maids whisper to another, "Give it 2 weeks. She'll do something that gets her thrown out. They always do." Emma walked back to her room, her head up but her heart heavy. She'd survived 6 months on the streets. She'd survived hunger, cold, and rejection. But this felt different. This felt like death by 1,000 cuts, each one small but together potentially fatal. That afternoon, Mrs. Eleanor continued tutoring Emma to help her catch up on the education she'd missed. Mrs. Eleanor was the first person in the household, besides James, who treated Emma like a human being. "Hello, dear," she said warmly, setting her bag down on the desk in Emma's room. "Mr. Harrison told me a bit about your situation. Don't worry, we'll take this slowly. No judgment, no pressure. We're just going to help you learn." For the first time since breakfast, Emma felt like she could breathe. "I used to be good at school," she said quietly, before everything happened." "Then we'll help you remember," Mrs. Eleanor said gently. "Now, let's start with some reading. Can you read this sentence for me?" The sentence was simple. The cat sat on the mat. But Emma stumbled over it anyway, her voice shaky. 6 months on the streets had eroded so much, not just her body, but her confidence, her education, the very sense of herself as someone capable of learning. "Try again, dear," Mrs. Eleanor encouraged. "You can do this." And Emma tried, again and again, each time getting a little better, a little more confident. Days turned into a week, then 2 weeks. The mansion slowly settled into a routine. Emma worked with Mrs. Eleanor every afternoon, learning to read more complex sentences, practicing her handwriting, or slowly rebuilding the foundation of an education. She helped the maids tend the gardens, not because anyone asked her to, but because she wanted to stay humble, to contribute, to prove she wasn't just taking. She thanked the guards each morning, learned their names, asked about their families. She offered to help the cooks carry supplies from the storage rooms. Slowly, very slowly, a few staff members began to soften toward her. Thomas, the young driver, always smiled when he saw her. One of the cooks, an older woman named Margaret, sometimes saved her an extra cookie. A gardener named Carlos taught her the names of the flowers. But Victoria and Marcus, they only grew more resentful, more determined. One evening, after James had returned from a long day of meetings, Marcus found him in his study. James sat behind his massive desk, reviewing contracts and sipping whiskey. "Sir," Marcus said, his tone carefully calibrated to sound concerned rather than accusatory. "May I speak candidly?" James looked up, tired but attentive. "Always, Marcus, what's on your mind?" Marcus sat down in one of the leather chairs across from the desk. "It's about the girl, Emma." "Sir, I admire what you're doing. I truly do. Your compassion is one of the things I've always respected about you. But I'm worried." James's eyes narrowed slightly. "Worried about what?" "About your reputation, about the business. The media's already talking, and not all of it is positive. Some people are saying you're being taken advantage of, that this is some kind of crisis of conscience that might affect your judgment in business matters." "Let them talk," James said dismissively. "I've never made decisions based on what people say." "I know, sir, but there's more." Marcus leaned forward, his face a mask of concern. "I've noticed things, small things. Food going missing from the kitchens, small items moved or misplaced. I'm not saying she's stealing, not exactly, but old habits die hard, don't they? The staff is getting nervous." James's expression hardened. "Has anyone actually seen her take anything?" Marcus hesitated, as if reluctant to continue. "Not directly, but the circumstances are suspicious. And Victoria has mentioned that Emma seems very interested in the valuable items around the house, asking questions about them, touching them. She's curious. She's from a different world. That doesn't make her a thief." "Of course not, sir. I'm worried about you, about what happens if this goes wrong. You've built everything on trust and reputation. If something were to happen, if she were to betray that trust, the damage could be severe." James stared at Marcus for a long moment, his eyes searching. Finally, he said, "I appreciate your concern, Marcus, but I make my own judgments about people. Emma stays. And if there are accusations, I expect proof, not gossip and suspicion." Marcus bowed his head. "Of course, sir. I only want what's best for you." He left the study, closing the door quietly behind him, but in the hallway, his face twisted into something ugly. Victoria was waiting in the shadows. "He defended her again," Marcus whispered viciously. Victoria's eyes glittered with malice. "Then we need to be smarter. We need to create proof he can't deny." "Agreed. But we have to be careful. Harrison's not stupid." "Neither are we," Victoria said, her smile sharp as a knife. "She's winning his heart. We need to break hers first, make her want to leave on her own." Marcus nodded slowly. "I have an idea, but it requires patience." "I've waited this long," Victoria said. "I can wait a little longer, as long as in the end that street rat is back where she belongs." Meanwhile, Emma sat in her room, practicing her handwriting by copying sentences from a book Mrs. Eleanor had given her. She wrote slowly, carefully, her tongue sticking out slightly in concentration the way it used to when she was younger, before the world had broken her. She didn't know about the conversation happening in the hallway. She didn't know about the plans being made, the trap being constructed around her like a cage she couldn't yet see. She only knew that for the first time in 6 months, she had hope, and she was determined to hold on to it, no matter what, even if the cost was higher than she could imagine. The mansion buzzed with tense energy. James had left for a 3-day business trip to Seattle, leaving Marcus in charge of household operations. To the staff, that meant strict rules and harsh oversight. To Marcus, it meant an open stage to destroy Emma once and for all. Victoria walked into Marcus's office, her heels clicking sharply. She folded her arms, her face hard. The girl is still here, eating at the master's table like royalty. If we don't act now, she'll win his entire fortune. Marcus leaned back in his leather chair, his eyes cold and calculating. Don't worry. By the time Mr. Harrison returns, Emma will be exposed as the thief she really is. He'll have no choice but to throw her out. Victoria's lips curved into a cruel smile. How? Marcus leaned forward, lowering his voice. Tonight we plant money in her room. Tomorrow I'll conduct a house inspection and discover it. Everyone will see the evidence. Even Harrison can't deny proof. Victoria's eyes glittered with malicious excitement. Perfect! Let the little rat taste the dirt again. That evening, while Emma sat in the library struggling through a children's book James had given her, Victoria slipped into Emma's room. In her hand was a brown envelope stuffed with crisp $100 bills, money that belonged to James's company accounts. Victoria slid the envelope carefully under Emma's pillow, her smile widening. Sleep well, little thief. Tomorrow, your fairy tale ends. When Emma returned to her room that night, tired but content, she knelt beside her bed and prayed quietly. Thank you, God, for Mr. Harrison. Please don't let anyone take this away from me. She climbed into bed, hugging James' jacket close, completely unaware of the trap lying inches beneath her head. The next morning, Marcus gathered all the staff in the main hall. His voice boomed with false authority. Mr. Harrison left me in charge, and I must ensure this house remains free of thieves. Last night, money went missing from the office. Today, we search every room. Victoria gasped dramatically. Oh no! Could it be one of the maids? Marcus's eyes glinted. We'll find out soon enough. One by one, rooms were inspected. Maids trembled. Guards stood tense. Whispers filled the hall. Finally, they reached Emma's room. Marcus walked in deliberately, followed by Victoria and 2 security guards. Emma stood near the door, confused and frightened. Marcus went straight to the bed. With exaggerated slowness, he lifted the pillow and pulled out the brown envelope. He held it high for everyone to see. There it is, he shouted triumphantly. The missing cash found under her pillow. He opened the envelope, letting the $100 bills cascade onto the bed. Gasps echoed through the room. Victoria clasped her hands to her mouth in mock horror. Oh my God, I knew it! Once a thief, always a thief! Emma's eyes widened in shock. Her voice broke. No, I didn't. I don't know how that got there. I swear! But the staff had already begun whispering viciously. She's a liar. She came from the streets. What did we expect? Mr. Harrison made a terrible mistake. Emma dropped to her knees, tears streaming down her face. Please, someone believe me. I would never steal from him. Someone is trying to destroy me. Marcus folded his arms, his face a mask of smug satisfaction. Enough of your lies. You've dishonored Mr. Harrison's kindness. Guards, lock her in the storage room until he returns. He can decide her punishment then. The guards hesitated. Some pitied the weeping girl, but Marcus's authority was absolute. They gently but firmly lifted Emma to her feet and led her toward the small storage room at the back of the mansion. Her cries echoed through the halls. Please, please believe me, I didn't steal. Someone planted that money. For the first time since entering the mansion, Emma felt the crushing weight of betrayal, worse than hunger, worse than cold. Why, God, she sobbed as the storage room door closed behind her. Why does the world hate me so much? I never stole. I never harmed anyone. Why do they want to destroy me? But even in her despair, she remembered James's words. You are not useless. You are a warrior. She clenched her fists, wiping her tears with the back of her hand. No, she whispered fiercely into the darkness. I will not break. They think they've won, but I'll prove them wrong. Hours passed. The storage room was cold and dim, lit only by a crack of light beneath the door. Outside, a young driver named Thomas, one of the few staff members who'd always treated Emma with kindness, approached the door carrying a tray of food. He whispered through the crack, Emma, don't cry. I believe you. I saw Victoria leaving your room last night with something in her hands. I didn't say anything because I was afraid of losing my job. But I know you didn't steal. Emma's eyes widened. You saw her? Thomas nodded, though she couldn't see him. Yes, when Mr. Harrison returns, I'll tell him the truth. Be strong. Hope flickered in Emma's heart. The trap was strong, but maybe, just maybe, God had sent her a witness. Meanwhile, Marcus stood on the balcony with Victoria, sipping expensive wine. He watched the sun sink behind the Portland skyline and smiled wickedly. By the time Harrison returns, she'll be nothing but dust under his feet, and I'll be closer to his empire than ever. But Marcus didn't know that fate had other plans. James Harrison's return would come sooner than expected, and it would bring a reckoning that would shake the mansion to its foundation. The mansion was unusually tense that evening. Staff whispered nervously in corners, their eyes darting toward the locked storage room where Emma remained imprisoned. Marcus walked the halls with swagger, as though he'd already claimed victory. Victoria followed him like a shadow, her smile sharp and cruel. "By tomorrow morning," Marcus whispered, "Mr. Harrison will send her back to the gutter where she belongs." But fate had other plans. Just before midnight, the sound of engines rumbled up the long driveway. Headlights swept across the mansion's facade. James Harrison's black SUV pulled up to the entrance, a full day earlier than expected. The front doors swung open, and James walked in tall and commanding. His presence immediately filled the hall with authority. Marcus rushed forward, forcing surprise onto his face. "Sir, we didn't expect you until tomorrow." James's sharp eyes scanned the room. "Why is the entire staff gathered at this hour? What's happened?" Victoria stepped forward quickly, her voice dripping with false concern. "Sir, I'm afraid there's been a theft. We had no choice but to act in your absence." James's jaw tightened. "A theft? In my house?" Marcus bowed slightly, his voice carefully measured. "Yes, sir. And I regret to inform you that the thief is the girl you brought in. We found cash hidden under her pillow, clear evidence. To protect your name, I had her locked in the storage room until you returned." Gasps rippled through the staff, though many had heard this story before. James's expression hardened, but he said nothing. He simply raised his hand. "Bring her to me. Now." Moments later, the guards unlocked the storage room. Emma stumbled out, weak from hours without food or water. Her dress was dusty, her eyes red from crying. But when she saw James, strength flickered back into her gaze. She rushed toward him, dropping to her knees. "Sir, please believe me, I didn't steal anything." Her voice cracked with desperation. Marcus quickly interjected, shaking his head with theatrical sadness. "Don't be deceived by her tears, sir. The evidence was undeniable. Victoria saw it. I saw it. She betrayed your trust." Victoria nodded confidently, folding her arms. "Yes, Mr. Harrison, we only wanted to protect the mansion and your reputation." James's eyes moved slowly from Emma to Marcus, then to Victoria. His voice was calm, but it carried the weight of steel. "Did anyone else witness this alleged theft?" The hall fell silent. No one spoke. Then from the back of the room, a timid voice rose. I saw something." Everyone turned. Thomas, the young driver, stepped forward. His hands trembled, but his voice grew steadier. "I saw Mrs. Victoria entering Emma's room last night. She was carrying an envelope. I thought maybe she was leaving something for Emma, but this morning, suddenly money was found there." Heavy silence fell over the hall. Victoria's face drained of color. No, sir, the boy is mistaken. He must have seen me walking past." "Do not lie to me." James's voice cracked like thunder. "I have known you for 7 years, Victoria. If you are guilty of this, confess now. Do not make it worse." Victoria's composure shattered. Her hands shook. "Sir, I only followed Marcus's plan. He said you were being blinded by pity. He said the girl would ruin you." Marcus's face twisted with fury. "You lying witch! You were the one who suggested it." Their alliance crumbled in seconds, each scrambling to throw blame on the other. The staff murmured louder now, some shaking their heads in disgust. James raised his hand, silencing the room instantly. His voice was cold, deliberate. "Enough! From this moment, Victoria, you are dismissed from my household. Pack your things and leave tonight." Victoria gasped, tears streaming down her face. "Sir, please." "And Marcus," James continued, his eyes burning into his former assistant, "you have betrayed my trust. You plotted against an innocent child out of jealousy. You are no longer my assistant. Leave this house before I have you arrested for conspiracy." Marcus's face contorted with rage. "Sir, you can't throw away 5 years of loyalty for a street rat." James's voice turned to ice. "She has more loyalty in her little finger than you ever had. You saw her as worthless. I see her as a child of destiny. Now get out of my sight." Marcus stood frozen, his pride shattering. Slowly he turned and walked toward the door, his fists clenched, his eyes burning with hatred. Victoria followed behind, sobbing bitterly, her career and reputation destroyed. Silence fell over the hall once more. James turned to Emma, who was still on her knees, tears of relief streaming down her face. He knelt beside her, his voice soft now. "Do you see, child? Even in the darkest betrayal, truth always rises. Never forget this lesson. You may be poor, but your honesty is worth more than all the gold in this mansion." Emma's voice broke. "Thank you, sir. Thank you for believing me." James helped her to her feet and turned to address the rest of the staff. His voice echoed through the hall. "Let today be a warning. This girl is under my protection. If I hear one more insult, one more whisper, that person will follow Marcus and Victoria out of these gates. Are we clear?" The staff bowed their heads, murmuring, "Yes, sir." James placed a firm hand on Emma's shoulder. "Come, you need food and rest." As they walked toward the dining hall, Emma felt something new stirring inside her. Not just relief, but strength. She had faced lies, rejection, and betrayal, yet she was still standing. But outside the mansion gates, Marcus stood in the shadows, his teeth clenched. His eyes burned with fury as he watched the lights inside. "This isn't over," he whispered venomously. "She may have won today, but I will return. And when I do, I'll make her regret ever stepping foot in that house." And so, while Emma tasted victory for the first time, a darker storm was already forming on the horizon, one that would test not just her courage, but James Harrison's as well. The morning after Marcus and Victoria's expulsion, the mansion felt lighter. For the first time since Emma had arrived, she walked through the marble halls without whispers clawing at her back. The remaining staff bowed politely when they passed her, not out of love, but out of fear of James's wrath. Emma noticed it all, but she didn't let it make her proud. She carried her breakfast tray carefully to the dining table, her steps gentle, her eyes lowered. Inside, though, her heart was alive with something new, dignity. James entered the dining hall wearing a charcoal suit, ready for a day of meetings. He paused when he saw Emma eating alone. "Child, why do you sit by yourself? Come closer." She moved toward him hesitantly. "Sir, I don't want to bother you." James smiled faintly. "You don't bother me. You remind me why I keep fighting in this world." He gestured to the chair beside him. "Sit. After breakfast, I'm arranging for a tutor. You'll begin learning properly. Reading, writing, mathematics. You're not just surviving anymore, Emma. You're going to grow." Emma's eyes widened. "A tutor? For me?" "Yes," James said firmly. "You are not just a survivor. You're a seed ready to grow. And one day, you'll stand tall without needing my name to protect you." Tears stung Emma's eyes, but they were tears of joy. For the first time since her parents' death, she felt seen, not as a burden, but as someone with potential. That afternoon, a kind woman named Mrs. Eleanor arrived at the mansion. She was a retired schoolteacher with silver hair and warm eyes. She gave Emma her first real lesson in reading and writing. Emma stumbled over letters and words, but every time she made a mistake, Mrs. Eleanor smiled gently. "Try again, dear." And Emma tried again, and again, determined not to waste the chance James had given her. Days turned into weeks. The mansion slowly transformed. Emma helped the maids tend the garden, not because she had to, but because she wanted to stay humble. She thanked the guards each morning and offered to help the cooks carry supplies. Slowly, a few staff members began to respect her, not because of James's protection, but because of her own kindness. But outside the mansion's golden gates, darkness was brewing. Marcus sat in a dim bar on the edge of downtown Portland. His once polished suit was wrinkled, his tie loose. He had lost everything: his position, his salary, his reputation. And in his mind, one person was to blame: Emma. "She thinks she's won," Marcus muttered, slamming his glass on the bar. "She thinks she can just waltz in and take my place. I built my life beside James for 5 years, and now some street girl sits where I should be." Across from him sat a man with cold eyes and a scar running down his left cheek. His name was Calvin, a shady businessman with a reputation for dirty deals. Calvin leaned forward, smirking. "If you want her gone, I can help, but it'll cost you." Marcus's eyes gleamed with bitterness. "Money isn't the problem. I want her destroyed. I want James to regret ever touching her." Calvin grinned. "Then we plan a scandal so big, even Harrison can't save her." Meanwhile, Emma's life inside the mansion continued to blossom. She now read short sentences, wrote her name clearly, and even began helping Mrs. Eleanor organize lesson plans for other students. James often watched quietly from the doorway, pride filling his chest. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in shades of orange and pink, James sat with Emma in the garden. She wore a clean blue dress, her hair neatly braided by one of the friendlier maids. She looked nothing like the starving child who'd once stolen food in desperation. "Emma," James said softly, "I need you to promise me something." She looked up at him, curious. "No matter what people say about you, no matter how they try to hurt you, never let their hatred turn you bitter. Use your pain as strength. That's how I built everything I have." Emma nodded slowly. "I promise, sir, but will the world ever stop hating me?" James's eyes grew distant. "The world will always have people who hate what they don't understand, but you must rise above them. That's the only way to win." His words sank deep into her heart, but just as hope was taking root in Emma's life, shadows were gathering once again. That night, Marcus moved in secret with Calvin. They forged documents, bribed a disgruntled security guard who wanted quick cash, and prepared lies so sharp they could cut through James's trust like a knife. Calvin's voice was smooth as oil. "By the time these documents reach Harrison, your little orphan will look like a con artist, not a daughter. He'll throw her out himself." Marcus's lips curved into a cold smile. "Good. Let her taste the streets again. But this time, not even James Harrison will save her." Back in her room, Emma knelt by her bed and prayed softly. "God, thank you for bringing me this far. But please, please don't let them take this away from me. Don't let me lose the only family I have left." The mansion was peaceful that night, but outside its walls, betrayal was creeping closer, ready to strike when Emma least expected it. And the battle for her future, and James Harrison's reputation, was about to begin. The city of Portland buzzed with its usual energy. Coffee shops filled with morning commuters, streetcars rumbling through downtown, and the Willamette River glinting under the autumn sun. But inside James Harrison's mansion, a storm was gathering. James had just returned from an early meeting when his assistant handed him the morning newspaper. His face hardened as he read the bold headline, "Billionaire Deceived? Street Girl's Secret Plan to Inherit Fortune." Beneath it was a photo of Emma walking beside James in the mansion gardens, taken weeks earlier by someone with telephoto lens. The article was filled with insinuations and half-truths, painting Emma as a manipulative orphan who'd somehow tricked Portland's most successful developer into taking her in. James's jaw tightened. He knew exactly who was behind this. At the same time, an anonymous package arrived at his office. Inside were forged documents, fake bank statements, falsified signatures, fabricated emails, all designed to make it look like Emma had been secretly siphoning money from his company accounts. James stared at the papers, his chest burning with anger. Could it be true? Had the girl he'd trusted actually betrayed him? But deep inside, something told him this was another trap. Within hours, the scandal exploded across Portland. Radio talk shows debated it. Social media erupted with opinions. Protesters even gathered outside the mansion gates, some holding signs that read, "Harrison's being played," and "Justice for real charities." Inside the mansion, the staff whispered nervously, "I knew she was after his money. She fooled him with those tears. This will ruin Mr. Harrison's reputation." Emma woke to chaos. When she stepped out of her room, several maids turned away coldly. One even muttered loud enough for her to hear, "Gold digger." Emma's heart pounded. What was happening? James called her into his study. His face was unreadable as he sat behind his large oak desk. The forged documents were spread out before him. "Emma," he said, his voice heavy, "tell me the truth. Are you plotting to steal from me?" Emma froze, her eyes wide with shock. "What? No, sir, I would never." James slid the papers across the desk. "Then explain this. Your name, your signature, bank transfers in your name." Emma's hands trembled as she picked up the documents. "Science." Her eyes widened in horror. It was her name, but she had never written it. Someone had copied her handwriting from her lessons with Mrs. Eleanor. Her chest tightened. "Sir, I didn't do this. I swear on my parents' graves, someone is framing me again." But James's expression remained hard. The staff crowded near the doorway, whispering viciously, "She's lying again. Just throw her out already." Tears filled Emma's eyes. "Please, sir, you said I was a warrior. You said I had dignity." I would never repay your kindness with betrayal. Please believe me." James's silence was crushing. His instincts screamed that Emma was innocent, but the evidence was damning. Just then, Thomas the driver stepped forward bravely. "Sir, forgive me for speaking, but I believe she's innocent. Remember last time? They framed her with money. This is the same thing. Another trap." The hall grew quiet. James's eyes flicked between Thomas and Emma. Finally, he slammed his hand on the desk. "Whoever planted these documents will regret it. Emma stays until I see real proof with my own eyes. I will not condemn her based on forgeries." The staff gasped. Some murmured in protest, but James's voice cut through like a blade. "Enough! Anyone who speaks against her speaks against me." Emma collapsed to her knees, sobbing with relief. "Thank you, sir. Thank you for trusting me." But far across town, Marcus heard the news and slammed his fist on the table. "He still defends her? Then it's war. If he won't see the truth, I'll bring him down with her." And so, while Emma clung desperately to James's trust, the battle lines grew deeper. The scandal was only the beginning. The real storm was yet to come. The scandal spread like wildfire. Portland's newspapers ran daily updates. Radio hosts debated whether James Harrison had lost his judgment. Even his business partners began calling, some threatening to pull out of major deals. "James, this looks bad," one investor said over the phone. "The media's painting you as a naive billionaire being conned by a street kid. Our shareholders are nervous." James held his head high in public, but inside, fury burned. He knew Marcus was behind it, yet the damage was real. One night, as James sat alone in his study, Emma knocked timidly on the door. She entered carrying her notebook, her face pale. "Sir," she whispered, "maybe I should leave. If my presence is destroying your reputation, I don't want to be the reason you lose everything." James looked up sharply. "Emma, listen to me carefully. You did not cause this. Evil men did. And evil only wins when good people run away. You're not leaving. Do you understand me?" Tears welled in her eyes. She nodded, clutching his words like a lifeline. But while James comforted Emma, Marcus and Calvin prepared their final strike. In Calvin's dingy office across town, Marcus slammed his hand on the table. "The newspapers weren't enough. He still protects her. We need to hit him where it truly hurts." Calvin leaned back, his scarred face twisting into a cruel grin. "Then we break his empire. I know about his next deal, an international development contract worth $300 million. If we leak false evidence linking the girl to financial fraud, his partners will abandon him. He'll lose everything, and he'll blame her." Marcus's eyes gleamed with dark satisfaction. "Yes, when he falls, she'll fall with him." The plan unfolded swiftly. Forged documents were created linking Emma's name to a secret offshore account supposedly tied to James's company. Fake emails were generated. Within days, James's international partners froze the deal. The news hit Portland like an earthquake. Harrison's empire shaken by fraud scandal. The mansion turned into chaos. Phones rang nonstop. Reporters camped outside the gates. Even loyal staff began to waver. "It's the girl," they whispered. "She brought bad luck." Emma felt the stares like daggers wherever she walked. Some maids no longer served her meals with respect. Guards avoided her eyes. Even Mrs. Eleanor grew worried, whispering, "Child, this battle is bigger than you. Be careful." One evening, James returned from a disastrous meeting, looking exhausted. His shoulders sagged under invisible weight. Emma rushed to him. "Sir, please tell me what's happening." James sank into his chair, rubbing his temples. "They froze my contract, Emma. My enemies are using your name to destroy me." Emma's chest tightened. "What if they succeed, sir? What if you lose everything because of me?" James looked at her, his eyes fierce despite his exhaustion. "If I lose everything but keep my integrity, I'll rise again. But if I abandon you, I lose my soul. And I'll never do that." Emma's heart swelled, but fear still gnawed at her. That night, something darker happened. As Emma walked in the garden to clear her mind, a shadow moved behind her. Suddenly, a rough hand clamped over her mouth. She tried to scream, but a cloth was pressed against her face, sweet-smelling, dizzying. Within seconds, everything went black. When Emma woke, she was tied to a chair in a dim warehouse. Her head throbbed, her heart pounded with terror. Marcus stood before her, his face twisted with rage. "So," he sneered, "the little beggar finally looks weak. You thought you could take my place? Because of you, I lost everything." Emma's voice shook, but her spirit didn't break. You lost because of your own greed, not because of me. Marcus slapped the metal table beside her, his eyes burning. Silence. Tomorrow, Harrison will receive a message. Either he abandons you or he loses his entire empire. Let's see how much you're really worth to him. Tears burned Emma's eyes, but she lifted her chin defiantly. You can threaten me. You can keep me here, but you cannot break me. I may be poor, but I'm not powerless. One day, you'll regret this. Marcus laughed coldly. We'll see. Back at the mansion, James paced furiously when he discovered Emma was missing. His fists clenched as he barked orders to his security team. Find her. Search everywhere. If anyone has touched her, they'll pay dearly. His heart pounded, not just as a protector, but as a man who'd come to love Emma as the daughter fate had given him. Meanwhile, in the warehouse, Emma whispered a prayer into the darkness. God, give me strength. Let the truth be revealed. Let me survive this storm. The night stretched long and dark, but the battle lines were clear now. Marcus wanted revenge, Calvin wanted power, and James Harrison was about to face the greatest fight of his life, not for money or reputation, but for the girl who had stolen not food, but his heart. The night in the mansion was restless. James Harrison sat in his study, his eyes bloodshot, his jaw clenched. His security team had searched every corner of Portland, but there was no sign of Emma. Then his phone buzzed. An unknown number flashed on the screen. He answered sharply. Who is this? A voice, smooth, mocking, spoke. James Harrison, the great billionaire. I have something you want. James's jaw tightened. Marcus. Marcus chuckled coldly. Correct. Your precious little street girl is with me. But don't worry, she's safe. For now. If you touch her... Oh, spare me the threats, Marcus interrupted. Here's the deal. Sign over your contract rights to Calvin's company, or she disappears forever. You have until tomorrow night. The line went dead. James's chest burned with fury. He immediately summoned his security chief. Track that call. Prepare the team. Tonight we end this. Meanwhile, in the cold warehouse, Emma sat tied to the chair, her body aching, but her spirit unbroken. She replayed James's words in her mind. You are not useless. You are a warrior. When Marcus entered with Calvin, Emma lifted her chin defiantly. Do you really think this will make you powerful? She said, her voice eerie despite her fear. No, you're weak men hiding behind lies and threats. Marcus's face twisted with rage. Silence. You ruined me. You made Harrison see me as nothing. After tonight, he'll lose everything because of you. Emma's eyes flashed. Mr. Harrison will never bend to you. And even if he loses everything, he's still greater than you'll ever be, because he has honor. What do you have? Lies, greed, and nothing else. Her words stung like fire. Marcus raised his hand to strike her. But at that moment, the warehouse doors burst open with a thunderous crash. James's security team stormed in, flashlights cutting through the darkness. The warehouse was surrounded. Hands up, the lead officer shouted. You're surrounded. Marcus spun around, his face draining of color. James stepped forward slowly, his voice calm but filled with steel. Marcus, look at yourself. You were once a man I trusted. Now you're nothing but a coward, hiding behind a child. Marcus's hand trembled. She took everything from me. You loved her more than me. James's eyes locked on his. She didn't take anything. You threw it all away with your own greed. Now release her, and maybe you'll still have a chance to rebuild your life. Emma's heart pounded. She whispered softly, Sir, don't plead for me. Let him do what he wants. I'm not afraid. Those words broke the tension. Marcus's eyes flickered with shock. The weak, trembling beggar girl he'd once despised now stood braver than him. In that moment of hesitation, Emma stomped hard on his foot and twisted away. The guards rushed forward, disarming Marcus and Calvin. Marcus was dragged away, screaming, No, she doesn't deserve this life. She doesn't deserve it. Calvin was already in handcuffs, his empire of lies collapsing around him. James rushed to Emma, pulling her into his arms. Are you hurt? She shook her head, tears streaming down her face. I'm fine, sir, but I didn't want you to risk your life for me. James's voice was soft, trembling with emotion. Emma, you're more than just a child I saved. You're family. I would risk everything for you. The next morning, Portland awoke to breaking news. Billionaire James Harrison exposes corruption. Former assistant arrested. Orphan girl vindicated. The truth spread like wildfire across the city. James stood before a crowd of reporters, Emma by his side. She wore a simple white dress, her hair neatly braided. "This child," James said firmly, "was once despised, rejected, and called worthless, but she stood strong. She's proof that no matter how poor or abandoned you are, dignity cannot be stolen. Today, I declare her not just my ward, but my daughter." Cameras flashed. The crowd erupted in applause. Emma took the microphone with trembling hands. Her voice was soft but steady. "I was once a beggar, sleeping on the streets. People spat at me, insulted me, and left me to die. But one man believed in me when no one else did. Today I say to every child suffering, don't give up. You are not useless. You are warriors. And one day the world will see your worth." Tears rolled down faces in the crowd. Marcus and Calvin faced trial. Their reputations were destroyed forever. Victoria, exposed for her role, vanished into obscurity, but Emma's life transformed. She went to school, studied hard, and years later built the Harrison Hope Foundation, an organization that fed, housed, and educated homeless children across Oregon, so no child would ever have to steal food to survive. James walked beside her every step of the way, proud as any father could be. Her journey had begun with hunger, rejection, and betrayal, but it ended with power, dignity, and hope. Because the girl who once stole a plate of food in desperation had stolen something far greater in the end: hearts, respect, and her rightful place in the world. 10 years later, Emma Harrison stood at the podium of the Grand Ballroom in downtown Portland. The annual Hope Foundation Gala was in full swing. Hundreds of donors, community leaders, and former street children whose lives had been transformed by her work. She wore an elegant navy gown, her hair styled professionally, but her eyes still carried the same fire they'd held that desperate day in the Sterling Room. James Harrison sat in the front row, now in his 60s but still sharp and commanding. He watched his daughter with immense pride. Emma's voice rang clear through the hall. "When I was 12 years old, I was invisible. Society had written me off. But one man refused to see me as worthless. He saw potential where others saw trash. Tonight, we honor not just him, but every person who chooses to see dignity in the forgotten." The crowd rose in applause. After the speeches, Emma found James in the garden outside the ballroom. The Portland city lights twinkled in the distance. "Thank you," she said softly, linking her arm with his. "For everything," James smiled. "You gave me more than I ever gave you, Emma. You reminded me why wealth matters, not for what it buys, but for what it can build." They stood together in comfortable silence. Far away, in a small apartment across town, Marcus watched the gala coverage on television. His face was lined with age and regret. He'd served 5 years in prison, lost everything, and now worked as a warehouse clerk. But as he watched Emma speak with grace and power, something inside him finally broke, not with anger, but with understanding. She hadn't taken his place. He'd destroyed it himself. And for the first time in 10 years, Marcus whispered into the empty room, "I'm sorry." Back at the gala, Emma looked up at the stars. "Mom, Dad," she whispered, "I hope you're proud." And somewhere, in the place where love never dies, 2 souls smiled, because their daughter, the broken girl who once stole food to survive, had not only survived, she had conquered.
Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy.